Hello everyone, my name is Wayne House, and this is my book report for EHS 556. So the book I chose for my book report is Teaching with Poverty in Mind by Eric Jensen. It was published by ASCD in Alexandria, Virginia, back in 2009. This book has about 184 pages, and it was ranked 11th in the educational philosophy category on Amazon.com. Before I talk much about the book, I want to talk about who the audience for this book would be. I believe this book is a valuable resource for new teachers, along with veteran teachers who are new to teaching low socioeconomic status students, or teachers who wish to better understand and serve their low SES students. Finally, this book is also a great resource for principals of schools who serve low SES students because it provides a great rationale about what these students are going through and how we can reach them. Before I talk about the book, a little bit of an introduction to this talk. We're going to talk about the purpose and the rationale behind the book. A topic that Jensen talks about a lot in this book is connection, so we'll talk a little bit about that. Then we'll talk about the relation of this book to classroom management, why this book's important to classroom management, the value of this book for new teachers, followed by some conclusions and references. So the purpose of this book, or what this book does and does not do. So this book does illuminate challenges faced by students in low SES status categories. It also illustrates how these challenges negatively affect the student's brain. On top of that, it describes how the human brain can change over time, and it provides examples for how this can be used in the classroom. And to me, one of the most important things it does is it provides examples that demonstrate the ability of the students raised in poverty to achieve academic success. So it shows that these students can achieve academic success. What this book does not do is it does not offer an exhaustive list of every idea on the reform of these students or every strategy to imply for these students. Jensen is very clear that these are just some of the things he came across in his research while writing the book, but this is by no means an exhaustive list of things. So some of the rationale that went into making this book, Jensen talks in his introduction about how his first encounter with these students was at a young age while they were in the classroom with him, and that he looked at these low socioeconomic students and thought, if these students just tried harder or had better values, they would succeed like the other students in my class are doing. And he mentions how small-minded of him that was. At the time, he didn't know any better. But as he started to become more interested in this topic and start to do his own research, this kind of rationale and idea changed to something more along the lines of, if life experiences can change poor kids for the worse, why can't we also use life experiences to change them for the better? And that's his rationale kind of behind doing this research and writing this book. So something he talks about extensively in the book is that these students who are in low SES category, they face several problems. It's not just one problem. It's not just two problems. And oftentimes these problems compound on one another. One problem leads to another, which leads to another. For instance, most of these students come from a single parent household. The problem with a single parent household is most of these parents are having to work two jobs to support the household. Because they're having to work two jobs, they have less time to spend with their student. And because they have less time to spend with their children, that leads to the children not having a very positive social interaction with their parents, and that leads to the parents normally becoming more of just an authoritative figure for them, and they lose that social connection. So something Jensen talks a lot about in this book is developing a connection with these students. During his research, while looking through neuroscience literature, he found that developing children need reliable caregivers who often offer high predictability. And this predictability was very important for their brains to develop in a normal fashion. If that predictability was not there, then their brains would typically develop adverse adaptive responses or coping mechanisms that are oftentimes more problematic in our classroom management. approaches. So, like I said, one thing Jensen really promotes is that for our schools to foster higher achievement, every student needs to have somebody that they feel is a reliable partner or mentor to them. So he really pushes every student should have someone in the school that they can talk to if we're going to have high achievement. And he expands on this idea a little bit when he starts talking about skills, emotional skills that are hardwired into us versus taught. If you look at the bottom right-hand corner of this slide, you can see that Jensen indicates that only a few emotional skills are hardwired in, those being sadness, joy, disgust, anger, surprise, and fear. These are things that are hardwired in through our genetics. But other stronger, more social and emotional skills are things that are taught. And going back to the discussion about single parent households, if you're not getting as much social interaction, these things are not going to be taught as readily to these students. So something that we often see is impulsiveness or inappropriateness or disrespectfulness in the classroom from these students. And Jensen kind of challenges this idea and says we should expect to see these. These are not things that should be a surprise to us. We should expect students to be impulsive, to blurt out inappropriate language, or to act disrespectful. That's because they haven't been taught these stronger social emotional skills that you can see here in this figure. And he says that it's our job as teachers to teach these traits to them. Jensen also mentions that there's not a whole lot that we can do to solve every problem these students are going to face. But one thing we can do is address this problem. We can help them develop some of these social and emotional skills so that they can function better in our classrooms and take some of these skills home to function better and use them as coping mechanisms for things that they're having to face. So how does this book relate to classroom management? Jensen talks about the 5 different pillars, and he labels them as a SHARE acronym. And he has these 5 pillars that he kind of walks through and talks about individually, but for this presentation, I'm just going to talk about the engaging instruction one as an example. He steps through all of these pillars the same, so this format will follow through for all of them. The first thing he does when he approaches one of these pillars is he looks at theory and research. So he looks at current research that has been done, and then basically what the theory behind that research was. So for this example with engaging instruction, he looked at the University of Indiana, who did a research study with 81,000 kids and found that half of all of those secondary students were bored every day. They were not engaged in their lesson. And he found that many teachers, when he went through this research, cited that their classroom management was one of their top challenges they faced on a day-to-day basis. And Jensen states that this shouldn't be a surprise to us, because if half of the secondary students are bored every day, they're not engaged, they're not paying attention, and they're going to be doing other things that often are problematic for normal classroom management styles. The next thing he does after he talks about theory and research is he moves into basically an example. In this situation, he calls it high poverty schools making it happen. And I think this is a great thing that he's doing, is showing that these schools that have a large percentage of low SES students are actually changing and making large strides for their students. So in this scenario, this was an example from Curtis Middle School in San Bernardino, California. And in 2003, this middle school almost closed due to issues it was having with student testing and other various things. And as of 2009, when this book was written, the school has satisfied 13 of its 25 yearly progress goals, which is a huge turnaround in a matter of 6 years. What they did was the teachers at the school sat down and decided they were going to make a difference and make a change in how they were trying to engage their students that they had. So what they were doing was looking up all these different engagement strategies, and they were practicing them and working on them and giving each other feedback on them and then implementing them in the classroom. And when they implemented these techniques in the classroom, they saw a huge turnaround in their students. So they attribute a lot of their success to increasing student engagement in their school. After providing the theory, the research, and an example of how this can happen, Jensen follows that up with action steps that we as the readers can use in our classrooms. And it's not just any action steps, it's action steps that he's found that's supported through research. So for the engaging instruction pillar, he talks about how we need to gather information from our students. We need to know how they feel. Do they like our classroom? Do they feel engaged? Are they participating? Do they feel drawn into what we're doing? The other thing that he says that we should ask them is, how can we engage you more? What would be more exciting for you? How can we get you involved in this more and more committed to our topic or our lesson? And then after that, we can use that information to develop new strategies and implement one strategy each week and monitor the progress. He says it's so important to monitor the progress so that we can look at each new strategy and say, is it working? Is it not working? If it's not, we need to get rid of it. If it is, we keep it and move on to something else. One caveat he mentions here that's very important that we should pay attention to is that students can only consume so much content per class, regardless of their socioeconomic class. So if we're inputting all these new strategies into our classroom and our curriculum, and the students get overwhelmed, they'll start just shutting down on us. So it's important that we stay below that kind of content cap that the students have. We don't want to throw too much content at them at once and then start shutting down because of that. It kind of messes up our gathering of information to see if our strategies are working or not. So the next thing I want to talk about is why I feel like this book is important for classroom management as a whole. And I think that this book is important because it provides clear indications of problems that we will face as teachers of low SES students. That way, they're not a surprise. We know what problems we are going to have. We know what to expect. And then this book also provides context and background that helps us understand why these behaviors are happening. It's much easier to correct a behavior if we can understand it, because then we have knowledge that helps us figure out ways to address that and make that no longer an issue, if possible. So having background is a big help for at least understanding the students and where they're coming from. This book also provides previous research that illustrates effective ways of reaching low SES students and correcting their behaviors. So there's a lot of things we can do that will help reach these students. And this book provides tried and true methods that have been backed up by research to do that. So why I think this book is valuable for new teachers, it is similar, but I also think it's worth re-mentioning here. This book explains why undesirable behaviors happen, why students are compelled to do some of these behaviors. And I think that's so important as a new teacher, because for me, I'm always focused on how I can fix the behavior. What is my correction strategy? What is my discipline if it requires discipline? But I don't ever consider why the student is doing what the student's doing. And I think that's a super important thing that I need to focus on, along with other new teachers, and really teachers in general, but especially for new teachers. Why are my students acting this way, and how can I help them not act this way in the future? This book also provides rationale for why general approaches to classroom management don't always work with low SES students. So what I mean by that is, most of the time when there's an adverse issue in the classroom and we have to correct it, kind of our first instinct is to go to an authoritative type manner where we tell a student, I need you to sit down, you've got to sit down, you've got to do your work, and it's very authoritative. Most of these students don't respond to that because in their home life they have a very authoritative surrounding, and they've just learned to tune that out or drown it out or ignore it. So it just doesn't work. Conventional classroom management doesn't always work. So this book provides alternative approaches along with the evidence, like I was mentioning earlier, to support them, showing that they do work. But these alternative approaches help to reach those low SES students who may not respond to normal classroom management practices. And then another reason I think this is a great resource for new teachers is it includes a study guide in the very back of it. And this study guide is a great resource that fosters understanding by helping to ensure that as we go through this book, we are critically reading, thinking about, and possibly implementing, if we're in the classroom already, the ideas that Jensen presents here. So I think the inclusion of a study guide is a great value for new teachers. In conclusion, I thought this book was had a very insightful viewpoint into the underlying causes of behavioral issues from low SES students. I'd never really considered thinking about what was causing these students to act the way they are, but I feel like I have a much better understanding of where these students are coming from and what they're struggling with and dealing with on a daily basis, and how I can alleviate some of that pressure in the classroom so that they're going to be more likely to engage and be present, at least while in the classroom. I thought this book provided thorough research into how a student's brain is affected by poverty and how we can harness that same process for an educational purpose, how we can kind of rewire these students' brains with positive approaches to help them achieve a greater level of academic success. And then finally, I thought this book showed incredibly powerful examples of how previous research or trials or even other schools have shown that low SES students can excel in the classroom, and they're not just a population to forget about or give up on. These students can excel and will excel as long as we as teachers put forth as much effort as we can to really meet them where they're at, address their concerns, and really help to bring them up with us rather than just kind of letting them slip away. With that, if you're interested in some further reading or this topic kind of interests you, Eric Jensen did publish another book after this one titled Engaging Students with Poverty in Mind. It is the second book after the one we've been talking about. It was published in 2013, and it is strictly talking about engagement. How can we engage these students and get them to be a part of our classroom and be active in learning? So I look forward to reading it. I would highly recommend it to you. Knowing what I know from this previous book, I'm sure this one's also fantastic and full of information. So with that, this is the reference for the book we've been talking about today, and I would like to thank you for listening, and I hope you have a great day.